So let's go ahead and dive in. I'm going to switch over to Pipeline. Actually, we're not going to spend much time at all in Pipeline because it's all about Excel today. Let me go ahead and I start by telling you first what we're going to go over, which is all kinds of tips and tricks that will keep you useful and zippy in Excel. That'll be helpful as it relates to Pipeline because a lot of our reports are downloaded, particularly under transactions, when you can download your spreadsheets right here. As well as some of the reports are actual downloads over here. So once you get your information into Excel, being able to wield it at your will to do exactly what you need it to do is super helpful. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Be sure to check out the first Excel webinar that we did because we covered macros, lots of sorting and filtering, etc. A lot of basics, but some really cool stuff as well. So be sure to check that out. I'm not going to repeat any of that here, but that will be useful for you as well if you didn't attend that one or didn't watch the video. Alrighty? Okay, so that said, wanted to first generally just give you kind of a statement about how useful Excel is, right? They're obviously useful for Pipeline reports, and the topics that we'll cover will help you in those reports. But generally understand that Excel, of course, I'm a tiny bit biased, one of my favorite apps. Excel is extremely useful for just organizing your life, right? Anything that you need to get sorted or in some sort of fashion where you can digest it better, Excel is extremely useful for that, right? For example, today's webinar had a ton of stuff that I needed to go over. It was of different topics. It was all over the board. So being able to categorize it here, put my category with a tip that I'm going to go over, any details, etc., throw it into a spreadsheet, sort it, rearrange it as I need to was super helpful. And that's just something you can't do in a standard word processing doc. I mean, you can, but it's a lot more cumbersome. So anyway, just very helpful to have the separate cells. Again, be sortable, movable, analyzable better within Excel. I use this list, my agenda for that. You could do logs, you could do your Pipeline reports, whether shopping lists, budgets, anything that needs to be organized, super helpful for Excel to help support you in there. Alrighty? So diving in, first thing I wanted to go over for our first category is ordering. Obviously, you know that you can sort tables. I've got a simple table here. If I wanted to sort this data, I can go to data and then sort. But one thing that people don't realize sometimes is that in addition to sorting on my column headers, since I've got those named, in addition to being able to sort on those column headers and sort on the values within them, I can also sort on some other alternatives here. I can sort based on cell color. I can sort based on font color. I can sort based on some conditional formatting icon that I've set that we'll talk about conditional formatting a little later. But just to know that you can actually sort based on the colors as well as the values. So right here, I've got some varied font colors. So if I said I wanted to sort based on, let's say, April and font color, and I wanted the blues to be on the top, right? Or I can do bottom if I wanted, and say okay, and it'll sort those for me. Okay, so it doesn't have to be based on cell values alone. So just a little tip there. Another handy one, depending on what you're doing, is the ability to transpose. So say, for example, I had this table that has January across the top and some names down, vertically here. If I wanted to transpose those so that the dates were down this way and the names were across the top, I could do that easily. It'd be a pain to have to do that manually, but if I wanted to, I could just highlight the information I wanted to transpose, copy it by either going up to wherever the copy is that I don't know because I always use the key command. There it is, right? Copy it, or right click and copy, right? And then when I go to paste, let's say I want to paste it over here, I can right click and paste special, right? It's probably up here as well. Paste special, okay? So I can right click and paste special. And when I do that, I select the option to, one of these is transpose, right? So if I transpose it, I can see here now that my dates are down the side and my names are across the top. So a really quick way to just reverse the polarity there of what you're looking at. Okay, so let me get rid of that. It's a neat little trick there. And that's a good segue actually into the next category, which is formatting. Pasting special is super helpful. As you saw when I went to paste special, I had several different options here. Actually, if I do paste special, it'll show me them so I don't have to hover to look at them. So I can paste formulas, and we'll get into formulas a little later, but I can paste just the values. Maybe my values in here were based on some formulas, and I don't want to carry over the formula necessary, but the actual answer, the actual value, right? So I can paste values, I can paste the format, I can paste comments, I can paste validation, actually not quite sure what that is, etc. Right? So these are the ones that are most commonly used here. So super helpful to be able to paste certain types of things. A couple of examples here. Let me do one. Let's say I wanted to retain this formatting here, right? I can just copy this. I'm going to do my key command for copy. And then here, I'll right click and paste special. And this time I'll say, let me go show it so that you can see the values. I'll just say paste the format, right? Okay, so that pastes my format without actually changing the data within the cells. So that's helpful. These were just a couple of cells, so that's not that big of a deal, but you could have something all the way across. Okay, so that can be helpful for pasting. Again, formats, your formulas, etc. Right? I'm going to dive right into filling. And when I say filling, I mean fill, F-I-L-L, not F-E-E-L. Filling, right? I want to fill cells. So just now when I pasted this format, I did it because it was, I needed to paste it across. I could have also dragged a format or filled across, in which case it would have overwritten my data, but in some cases that may be okay, right? So if I drag this all the way across, it's going to fill it across and change the formatting as well as what you see there, right? So that can be a particular way of getting your format across. In addition to copying and pasting special, right? But obviously, as you can see, it's got some additional benefits to being able to fill like that. I just filled by dragging my little handle there. Let me undo that. By dragging my little handle, that's one way of filling. But no, like I mentioned, it filled some special information for me. Let's go down here to look a little closer at what it does. So again, if I drag a handle on a particular piece of data, Excel is super smart and it knows what series of information I may want to fill across, right? So I did January, that's a very standard abbreviation for the month. So it knows I want to fill across for months. So it does that easily for me. That's really helpful instead of typing all those out, especially if I'm going, a whole year or maybe a year and a half, right? It fills that across for me. I could also do dates, right? Maybe I'm saying January 10th, right? It knows that's January 10th, fills that across for me, right? January 11th, 12th, etc. It's another smart way that it knows what you need to have in there. I could even do, let's say, January 2020, right? Actually, I'm going to undo, which we'll talk about in a second. We're going to undo all of that and just change this to start, because a moment ago when I changed it to January 10th, it changed that to a month and a date format. So then when I did January 2020, it still had the month date format. I don't want that. I really want it to be January and then the year, right? So now it knows that's January 2020. And when I fill that across, it knows that it's each month, January, February, March, 2020, etc. Right? Okay, I can do the same for, let me undo that formatting. Let's say I put 100 in there and go across. That's not quite enough information for Excel to know what I'm trying to do. So in that case, I might need to give it a little more information and say I want to go, one digit at a time, 100 to 101, right? Then I can fill that across and it knows. Okay, or maybe I wanted to go 200, right? So it knows that I can fill that across. Okay, so super smart and anticipating what your series of numbers or data should be. But if I wanted to, I could also use the menu, right? So if I go like this and specify how far I want it to go, actually, let me give it one more, right? And then I go there and fill and series and give it a step value of 2, okay? So you see it goes every 2 months there. So I can have it go incrementally instead of just one step at a time. Okay, so that is filling. Super useful, again, for completing that series, but we'll also see some more benefits of filling once we talk about formulas in a moment. Another formatting tip I wanted to mention, under number formatting, let's go back to number formatting here. Lots of neat things you can do here. Let's say I had a series of numbers here. Let's say 23, 56, 15, 80, 55, 88, NA, 612, and then NA again, right? But for whatever reason, I did not want these NAs to show, or I had some text in here and I didn't want them to show. When you calculate, when you add sums or even hover to see what your totals are down here, that text is automatically not included. But you could just want it to not show anyway, right? In that case, you can format your numbers. And so a lot of what we're about to do is about formatting numbers here, or formatting cells. When you format it, you can specify it so that it does not include that text. So let's go into our number formatting here. In all these cases, you'll want to do a custom format, right? So to suppress the numbers, you've got a couple of different options. Keep in mind that when you're specifying, when you're typing out your format here, the way that the system recognizes how to format information is 4 different ways. And they are, I'm going to type here just so you can see visually what it looks like. Whatever you put in the first position will be how the system, how Excel formats the number when it's a positive number. Whatever you put in the second will be its format for negative, and then 0, and then text, right? So if we were to put 3 formats here and leave the 4th one blank, then that would mean whenever there's text, that format of that text would be blank, right? So if we were to put general, and then semicolon, negative general, and then semicolon general for the 0 position, and then nothing for the last position, right? It'll remove those. Okay. So just a little trick there to suppress text when you don't want it to show. Another trick is, I'm sure you know about the ability to hide a column, right? If you select a column header and then say hide, it'll hide that column, right? So it's hidden there. You can select both of those and unhide everything if you didn't want to, but sometimes that can be cumbersome, especially if you've just got a few columns in your spreadsheet. So another way to hide the text is to use your formatting, right? So let's go back to formatting. And this time, remember, I've got 4 different methods of what they will appear like, right? Positive, negative, 0, and text. So if I were to simply include the semicolons and say don't put anything in any of those positions or any of those for any of those formats, then it'll take it all out, right? I can still see it up here, right, when I click in the cell, so it's still there, and I can even always go back and change the format to you know, say general, and it's still there. Okay, but just a little tip for if you ever wanted to hide the data without actually hiding the column. All right. And that could be also maybe you've got confidential data and it's up on your screen a lot and you want to sort of keep it hidden and you only want to see it when you're maybe selecting the cell, something like that. Alrighty. Next thing I wanted to go over is just formatting wise, the ability to include multiple rows within your cell. You might already know this one, but if I'm typing some information, let's say agent A, and then I wanted to add an additional line within that cell, I can hold down my Alt key and hit return, and then add an extra line in there. Okay, so just a little tip there. And then the last formatting tip that I wanted to show you about is conditional formatting, which is awesome. It's straightforward, but it can be really powerful, especially if you combine it with formulas, which we're not going to get into today, but I'll sort of point that out to you. Okay, so if, let's say I wanted to, let's make all these black again because that's bothering me. Okay, so let's say I wanted to format or to highlight certain cells depending on what their value was, right? So if they're over, say, $50,000, that's a big deal, so I want to highlight those. So I could highlight this section, go to Conditional Formatting, and I'm going to create a new rule for it. And I want it to only highlight in cases where the format only cells that contain this rule that I'm about to set up, right? So if I said, let's say if the cell value is greater than 100,000, right? Then I'm going to format that to be really bright or something, right? And maybe I make it bold as well. And say, okay. So it highlights, and I've got some errant stuff there. I should have specified not the text, right? So, but then you can see I can it bolded it, it gave it a background color that I specified. And even if I change it, right, I change that to 0, it updates it accordingly. So that can be really useful. It makes your information more dynamic, helps you analyze it at a glance better. So a really useful tool. And you can get really crazy with conditional formatting. It can do ranges. It can do all the things that you saw there when you're creating your rules, right? It can be cell value. It could be, you know, if they've got a blank or not, the dates, looking for specific text, etc. Okay, so super dynamic there. Alrighty. You can even set conditional formatting to include icons, right? If it meets a certain criteria, use icons. Alrighty. So that's it for formatting. Wanted to get into some time savers. As you're moving through Excel, again, it's just really useful to be able to do things quickly, especially ones that you do regularly. Copying. Let's say I wanted to copy this column, I could copy it, and I'm just using my key commands. That was the one for copy, which is Control-C, and then I could paste that, right? Another way to quickly copy is to, let me get rid of that highlight there, is to, while I'm selecting what I want to copy, hold down my Control key, drag it, and it'll copy it that way as well, right? Without having to copy and paste. It's a minor little time saver, but a real helpful one if you copy regularly. All right. I did mention this in the last one, but it kind of warrants mentioning again, and that is if you want to select all the cells within a sheet, this little square up here, if you click that, it'll select everything for you. You use that a ton, so it's helpful to repeat that one. One trick I actually didn't realize until I was preparing for this webinar is that when you are on a cell, right? Let's say I'm looking at one of our pipeline downloads here. If I needed to enter information that is within a cell, I could, while I'm in the cell, hold down my Alt key and then arrow down, and it will show me all the values that exist within that cell. So if I needed to change it to, you know, Park Street office, I could easily do that. Right? Or over here, if I arrow down, it'll show me all the values in that column. Did I say cell before? And all the values in that column. Alrighty, and easily change those. So that's a pretty cool thing. Didn't realize that. Another time saver is, I'm positive you know about undoing, right? I've done something crazy and I need to Control-Z to undo what I just did. You can actually look at your history of undo and go back in one click to multiple iterations of your changes, right? So if I want to go all the way back to my sort, well, that's a lot of changes I made. I shouldn't have done that. That's going to make me jump ahead up here to come back to where I was, right? I can also redo. So I can undo multiple items at a time, right? By going back to that undo history. And I can also redo if I had any. Let me go back a little bit so you can see that. Turn on the redo. And I can also redo at the same level of multiple items at a time. Okay. So very helpful to save time instead of, you know, undoing like 10 times if you need to, and also knowing precisely where you want to go. Having it named, having your undos renamed is pretty awesome, right? Kind of reminds me of Photoshop, but very nice to be able to visually see exactly where you want to go back to, and same for going forward. Okay, I'm going to go back to where I dragged and dropped only, right? Okay, so going back to a particular point in time. And that leads me, speaking of redo, to another super useful feature. I would say I use this every day for sure. And that is the ability to redo with a key command, right? So just like you've got Control Z to undo, you've got Control Y to redo, right? So you can use your key command to do that redo just as well as you do for the undo. But even more beneficial is Control Y works for redoing what you just did, right? So let's say I were to bold all of this, right? Let's say I go bold, and then you know what? I want to do that again. I can Control Y, and it'll do the same thing again. That doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but you'd be surprised how many things you do multiple times that you can just Control Y instead of having to go through and execute the exact same thing again with whatever steps it took, right? So that could be formatting. You know, again, I change this to yellow, and then I can do, well, that was just a click, but you know, then I can just Control Y to do it again. Super useful for inserting and deleting space, whether it's rows or columns. So let's say I wanted to insert, you know, several rows here, right? I can just Y, right? Control Y, and get all those spaces. Because a lot of times you find yourself just needing to increase spaces when you're adding information. And same for delete, right? If I were to delete those rows, I could Y to delete more and more. Okay. Of course, if I've got all this blank space, I'd probably duplicate more than just the 3 or insert more than just the 3, but you get the point. Super, super, super helpful. Love Control Y, saves a ton of time. All right. And then last time saver, again, I think I probably do this at least 10 times per Excel session, at least. And that's Control 1 to get to your formatting page, to get to your formatting dialog. You know, earlier when I was clicking number, that was like really painful because I wanted to do Control 1, which is how I always get there. That'll take me to my formatting dialog where I can specify exactly which area I want to format, my borders, my numbers, which I use a lot, and fill, fonts, etc. Okay, so Control 1 all day. Alrighty, so super helpful there. Okay, and that leads us to formulas. So formulas are amazing. I'm not going to get into advanced formulas, and I'm not going to get into charts or pivot tables or anything today. We'll save that for a later day, maybe. Tons of stuff to cover here, even just with the formulas. But so formulas allow you total control. Anything that you would want to do in Excel, there is a formula to do it. I can practically guarantee you, right? But I'm going to go in its easiest form. Formulas allow you to do calculations on the data that's in your spreadsheet, right? So let's say I wanted to add these 2 cells, for example. The easiest form of a formula is probably that, adding 2 cells. A formula always starts with equals. So if you type in equals, Excel knows that a formula is coming, right? So if I were to say equals this, I just clicked in that cell to specify it, plus this, click in that other cell to specify it, and then say enter, that's a formula right there. So I've just now added these 2 values and got my total. An easy way to get a total or a summary is if you've got a column or a group of data that's pretty well defined, right? I've got this nice clean list or column of data. I can do an auto sum, right? So I just click auto sum and I hit enter, and it automatically sums it for me. Righty? So that's a shortcut for a formula. Let me get rid of that one. Okay, so let's say I just created this simple formula here, right? And I wanted it to be the same for each person, for Jan, for Lewis, etc. I can use my handlebar here and drag it down. This is another benefit of filling, right? It drags down that formula, not the value, but the actual formula, right? So that's a nice shortcut way of getting the same formula for each row. And you can see Originally, when I created this formula, it was for H4, which is H4, right? Plus I4, right? You can see it up there. But for each subsequent one, it does the appropriate row, right? So now it's for H5 and I5, and this one's for H6 and I6, etc., right? There may be times, though, that you really want to reference an absolute field, right? So let's say I wanted this value to be 50% of those things, right? So let's say my threshold is 50%, 0.5, okay? So let's say I wanted this value to be this plus this times 50%. So I could say equals this times this, right? And since I want those to be paired, I'm going to put those in parentheses, right? And then I'm going to say times this value, right? Okay. Oh, was that 0.5? Oops, I said times. I meant plus. There we go. Alrighty. Which actually happens to be, since these are the same, let me make this a different number, make this 2,500. Okay, so that's a little better. Okay, so that did that calculation for me based on that 50%. If I were to drag this down now, okay, notice it doesn't work quite as well because now it's referencing A2, right? And here it's referencing A3, right? It's coming down appropriately as it should. That's because I want this, again, to reference an absolute value. So in that case, instead of just saying plain old A1, there's a symbol I can use, which is $A, $1. That's saying always this column and this row. Make this an absolute value. Always reference this column, $A, always this column, and always this row, $1. So that's saying always that cell. So now if I fill it down, it knows it's always referencing $A, $1, right? It's not going down the rows with me. Okay, so those are two pretty basic fundamental formula tips that will help you. And you might already know formulas, but wanted to mention those. And then just wanted to extrapolate on that just a little bit. Let's say I wanted to, I'm just going to dive a little deeper into an if statement, right? Let's say I wanted something specific to happen if the value were a certain value. Now you can do that with conditional formatting for formatting if something is a certain value, but you can also change text based on something being a certain value. So let's say I wanted to say equals, right? To say it's a formula, and my formula is if, right? Because I want to say if something is happening. So if I say if, and then I open my parentheses here, I get some help, right? If this logical test, if my statement that I'm about to say is true, then I'll specify my true value and my false value. So I'm going to say if this is greater than this, right? Then I want to say great, else I want to say bad, right? Okay. So then I can come down here. I can even conditionally format this if I want to. Okay. So all of these are greater. Let's make one of these. Let's make this $50,000. Okay. Right. So you can see that it responds appropriately, right? So you can specify, and it could be pass fail, it could be people's names, you know, whatever you need to do, but you can, if statements are really straightforward and easy to understand, and you get that help once you start typing equals if, right? Just in case you forget. Alrighty. Hopefully there are some tips in there that will help you. And I think I'm going to close it there for today.